The moment I opened my eyes, I knew I'd been given a second chance. My hands trembled as I stared at the calendar on my phone. March 15th, 2019. 5 years before my death. 5 years before Daniel, the man I'd loved more than life itself, stood by and watched his family destroy me. My breath caught in my throat, sharp and painful, as the memories of my previous life flooded back. The betrayal, the humiliation, the slow, agonizing death in that cold hospital room while he signed papers to marry Victoria, his childhood friend, the woman his mother had always preferred. I died alone, broke and broken. But not anymore. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding against my ribs like a caged bird. The silk sheets felt foreign against my skin, too soft, too expensive. Because this was the old me, the Jenny who still had her trust fund, her reputation, her dignity. The Jenny who didn't know yet that loving Daniel Carter would cost her everything. My phone buzzed, a text from him. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't wait to see you tonight. I love you." I stared at those 3 words until they blurred. I love you. The same words he'd whispered while his mother orchestrated my downfall. The same words he'd said even as he chose his family's approval over my survival. My finger hovered over the screen, trembling with rage and something darker, satisfaction. I deleted the message without responding. The first act of defiance felt like shedding a skin I'd worn too long. I could almost feel the universe shift, responding to this new version of me, the one who knew exactly how this story ended and refused to play the victim again. My reflection in the mirror showed a 24-year-old woman with clear eyes and unbroken spirit. In my previous life, I'd spent years trying to mould myself into what Daniel's family wanted. I dimmed my light, apologised for my success, made myself smaller. I'd watched my own mother's company, the one she'd left me, crumble under their interference while I focused on being the perfect girlfriend, then fiancée, then discarded ex-fiancée. Never again. I dressed carefully that morning, choosing a crimson dress that I'd bought but never worn in my first life. Daniel's mother had said red was too bold, too attention-seeking. The woman in the mirror looked like she could set the world on fire. Good. That was exactly who I needed to be. The cafe where Daniel and I were supposed to meet for lunch was already buzzing with the weekend crowd. I arrived early, ordering a black coffee and positioning myself where I could see the entrance. My hands were steady now, cold and controlled. The trembling had stopped the moment I'd made my decision. He walked in at exactly noon, punctual as always, his smile brightening when he spotted me. Daniel Carter, tall, handsome, the golden boy of the Carter banking dynasty. Women turned to look at him just as they always had. In my previous life, I'd felt so lucky to be chosen by him. Now I saw the truth. I hadn't been chosen. I'd been selected, tested, and ultimately found disposable. "Jenny." He leaned down to kiss me, but I turned my head slightly so his lips grazed my cheek instead. I felt him pause, confused, before he sat down across from me. "You look different. That dress is stunning." "Thank you." My voice came out cooler than I'd intended, but I didn't correct it. He ordered his usual, black coffee, no sugar, and reached for my hand across the table. I let him take it, studying the way his thumb traced circles on my palm. This small gesture had once made me melt. Now it felt like a snake coiling around my wrist. "I have news," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. "Mother wants to have dinner with us next week. She's finally ready to discuss the engagement party plans." There it was, the first trap. In my previous life, I'd been so thrilled, so eager to prove myself to Eleanor Carter. I'd spent weeks planning only to have every suggestion criticised, every decision overruled. The engagement party had become a showcase of my inadequacy, orchestrated perfectly to show the Carter social circle that I wasn't worthy of their precious son. I pulled my hand away gently, picking up my coffee cup. "That's thoughtful of her, but I'll have to check my schedule." Daniel blinked, his smile faltering. Check your schedule. Jenny, this is important. Mother is making an effort. So am I. I met his eyes over the rim of my cup, watching confusion cloud his handsome features. My company has several projects launching next month. I can't just drop everything. Your company? He said it like I'd claimed to own the moon. You mean your mother's old business? Jenny, we've discussed this. Once we're married, you won't need to... Won't need to what, Daniel? My voice was soft, but something in it made him stop mid-sentence. Work? Build something of my own. Have a purpose beyond being your wife. The cafe seemed to grow quieter around us. Or maybe that was just my perception narrowing to this moment, this conversation that would set the tone for everything to come. That's not what I meant. His jaw tightened, a flash of irritation breaking through his usual charm. I just think it's impractical for you to pour energy into a struggling company when we're planning our future together. Mother agrees that your mother has many opinions. I set down my cup with deliberate care. But my business decisions aren't hers to make, or yours. I watched the shock register on his face. This wasn't the Jenny he knew, the one who nodded and smiled and tried so hard to please. This was the Jenny who died penniless because she trusted him to protect her, only to learn that his protection came with conditions she could never meet. What's gotten into you? He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Are you angry about something? Did Victoria say something at the charity gala? Victoria. Just hearing her name made my chest burn with cold fury. In my previous life, she'd played the role of concerned friend so perfectly. She'd offered sympathy when Eleanor criticised me, suggested improvements with such gentle condescension, and slowly, methodically positioned herself as the better choice. The woman who understood the Carter family. The woman who'd been raised for this life. The woman Daniel married 3 months after I lost everything. Victoria and I barely spoke at the gala, I said, which was true. In my previous life, I'd spent that entire evening trying to impress Eleanor, while Victoria circled like a well-dressed shark. But since you brought her up, I've been meaning to ask, does she always touch your arm that much when you talk? Or is that a new development? Daniel's face flushed. That's ridiculous. Victoria and I grew up together. We're friends. Of course, I smiled, and something in that smile made him lean back slightly. Friends who have dinner twice a week. Friends whose mothers have been planning their union since childhood. Friends who would make such a perfect match according to every society page in the city. Jenny? His voice held a warning now, the same tone he'd used in my previous life when I dared to question anything. You're being paranoid. I chose you, didn't I? I proposed to you. You did. I stood up, gathering my purse. The cafe felt too small suddenly, too full of memories I was rewriting with every word. And I'm choosing to prioritise my company. Tell your mother I'll let her know about dinner. Where are you going? He stood too, reaching for my arm. His fingers closed around my wrist, not painfully, but firmly, possessively. We're not finished talking. I looked down at his hand, then back up at his face. In my previous life, I would have stayed. I would have apologised, explained, soothed his ego. I would have made myself smaller to make him comfortable. Yes, we are. I pulled my arm free, and the ease with which I did it seemed to shock him more than my words. I have a meeting with the board of directors in an hour. Unlike you, I can't afford to waste my inheritance on bad investments and expect my family to bail me out. His face went white, then red. How do you know about... Goodbye, Daniel. I walked away before he could finish, my heels clicking against the floor with a rhythm that sounded like victory. I didn't look back, but I could feel his stare burning into my spine. Let him wonder. let him question, let him feel for just a moment what it was like to be off balance and uncertain. The spring air hit my face as I stepped outside, cool and fresh and tasting like freedom. My phone was already buzzing, Daniel calling, texting, demanding explanations. I turned it to silent and hailed a cab. The board meeting was real and it was crucial. In my previous life, I'd missed it, choosing instead to help Daniel prepare for a presentation to his father. That absence had cost me votes, support, and eventually my company. The board had sold to a competitor within 6 months, citing my lack of commitment and leadership. This time, I walked into that conference room 30 minutes early, armed with research, projections, and a 5-year plan that would make them see me not as Richard Morrison's grieving daughter, but as a force to be reckoned with. Miss Morrison. James Hartford, the oldest board member and my mother's former mentor, stood as I entered. His surprise was evident. In my previous life, I'd been timid, apologetic, desperate for their approval. We weren't expecting you quite so early. I wanted time to prepare. I set my portfolio on the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. I know many of you have doubts about my ability to lead this company. Today, I'm going to prove those doubts wrong. For the next 2 hours, I presented a vision that drew gasps, skeptical murmurs, and finally, grudging respect. I knew which markets would boom, which technologies would revolutionize our industry, which partnerships to pursue, and which to avoid. Because I'd lived through the next 5 years once already. I knew exactly which moves would succeed and which would fail. By the time I finished, James was leaning back in his chair, a slight smile playing at his lips. Miss Morrison, I must say this is unexpected, ambitious, perhaps overly so. Ambition is only excessive if you lack the skill to back it up. I gathered my notes, my hands steady. I have the skill, the vision, and the dedication. What I need from this board is trust and support. Can I count on that? The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. 7-3 in favour of my new direction, with James abstaining. As I left the building, my phone showed 23 missed calls from Daniel and a text from his mother. Daniel tells me you were quite rude today. We need to discuss your behaviour. I almost laughed. Eleanor Carter thought she could still control me with guilt and social pressure. She had no idea she was dealing with someone who'd already survived her worst. Instead of responding, I forwarded the message to my lawyer with a simple note. Document everything. I may need it later. That night, Daniel showed up at my apartment. I watched him through the security camera, seeing the way he paced, checked his watch, straightened his tie. He looked nervous. Good. He should be. I didn't answer the door. He knocked for 15 minutes, his voice growing increasingly agitated through the intercom. Jenny, I know you're in there. Your car is in the garage. We need to talk about today. About whatever is going on with you. Well, whatever is going on with me? As if my unwillingness to be manipulated was a psychological problem that needed fixing. Jenny, please. I'm worried about you. Mother is concerned too. She thinks maybe you're under too much stress, that perhaps you should see someone. I pressed the button. A therapist, Daniel. Is that what your mother suggests? That I'm mentally unstable because I won't let her run my life? That's not. He stopped, clearly thrown by my direct response. Can I come up? We shouldn't discuss this through an intercom. No. The single word hung in the air. I could see him on the screen, his mouth opening and closing, searching for the charm that usually worked on me. I don't understand what's happening, he finally said, and for the first time he sounded genuine. Yesterday, everything was fine. Today, you're acting like a stranger. Did I do something wrong? Did he do something wrong? The question was almost funny in its obliviousness. In this timeline, he hadn't done anything yet. But he would. He would stand by while his mother destroyed my reputation. He would believe Victoria's lies about my supposed affairs, my financial irresponsibility, my unsuitability as a wife. He would choose their approval over my truth every single time until there was nothing left of me to choose. "You didn't do anything wrong yet," I said softly, knowing the cameras wouldn't pick up my expression. "Good night, Daniel." I turned off the intercom, silenced my phone, and poured myself a glass of wine. Through the window, I could see the city lights, stretching out like fallen stars. In my previous life, I'd spent so many nights staring at this same view, wondering what I'd done wrong, how I could fix things, why loving someone completely wasn't enough. Now I knew the truth. It had never been about me. It had been about power, control, and a family that saw people as assets to be managed or liabilities to be eliminated. My phone lit up with a new message, but not from Daniel. "Victoria, heard you made quite an impression at the board meeting today. Good for you, Jenny. We should have lunch soon. I'd love to hear all about your plans." The sheer audacity of it made me smile. She was already positioning herself, just like before. The concerned friend, the supportive ally, the snake in designer clothing. I typed back, "I'm quite busy these days, perhaps in a few months." Her response came immediately. "Of course, Daniel mentioned you've been stressed. Take care of yourself. XO." There it was, the subtle reinforcement of the narrative. Jenny is stressed. Jenny is unstable. Jenny isn't coping well. The same story they told before, laying groundwork for my eventual destruction. Except this time I was writing the story. The next week passed in a carefully orchestrated dance. I was polite but distant with Daniel, professional but firm with Eleanor's increasingly demanding calls, and coldly pleasant in my brief encounters with Victoria. I attended social functions but left early. I answered messages but kept responses brief. I was visible but unreachable, present but disconnected. It was driving them insane. "You're playing with fire," my assistant Sophie warned me on Friday afternoon. She'd been my mother's assistant first, loyal and sharp, and one of the few people I trusted completely. "The Carters aren't used to being ignored. Eleanor has been calling the office daily. Let her call." I signed the contract in front of me, a partnership that would position my company at the forefront of a market boom I knew was coming. "What can she do? I'm not her employee or her daughter-in-law, not yet, not ever." Sophie's eyebrows rose. "Not ever? Jenny, you're engaged to Daniel." "Am I?" I held up my left hand, bare of the engagement ring I'd worn religiously in my previous life. I'd put it in a drawer the day I was reborn, and there it would stay. "I don't see a ring. Do you?" "You took it off?" Sophie's shock was genuine. "When? Why?" "The clasp was bothering me," I lied smoothly. "I'll have it resized soon." But we both knew I wouldn't. Just as we both knew that the Daniel who'd called the office 17 times this week was starting to panic. His control was slipping, and for someone who'd never been denied anything in his life, that was unbearable. The confrontation came on Saturday night at the annual spring charity gala, the same event where, in my previous life, Eleanor had publicly criticised my dress choice, and Victoria had swooped in to save the evening with her perfect grace. I arrived alone in a gown that cost more than most people's cars. It was midnight blue, cut to perfection, and absolutely stunning. I'd had it custom made using my knowledge of next year's fashion trends to create something that would look prophetic. The reaction was immediate. Conversations paused, heads turned, and Eleanor Carter's face when she saw me across the ballroom went absolutely rigid with fury. Daniel materialised at my side within seconds, his hand reaching for my elbow. "We need to talk. Now." "We're at a charity gala, Daniel." I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, my smile perfectly calibrated. "Surely, whatever you need to say can wait until a more appropriate time." "You've been avoiding me for a week. You took off your ring. You're not returning Mother's calls. His voice was low and tight, meant only for my ears. What the hell is going on? I took a sip of champagne, letting him wait, letting him feel the anxiety of uncertainty. Around us, the cream of society watched with barely concealed interest. The Carter heir visibly distressed. His fiancée cool and untouchable. The gossip would be delicious. I've been busy, I said finally, building my company, managing my investments, living my life. Surely you understand the demands of business, being a Carter and all. His jaw clenched. This isn't about business. You're shutting me out. Shutting us out. Mother thinks... I don't care what your mother thinks, Daniel. I turned to face him fully, and something in my eyes made him take a step back. I don't care what she wants, what she plans, or what she expects. I'm done trying to earn approval from a woman who will never give it. That's not fair. She's trying... Is she? I laughed, cold and sharp. Then, why did she tell the Ashfords that I was adequate but unrefined? Why did she suggest to the Blackwells that you were making the best of a youthful mistake? Why has she spent the last 6 months systematically poisoning every important family against me while smiling to my face? His mouth opened, but no words came out. He didn't know I knew. How could he? He'd been so careful to keep his mother's campaign subtle, to make it look like society's natural rejection rather than orchestrated warfare. How did you... He stopped, realizing the admission in the question. It doesn't matter how I know. I set down my champagne glass on a nearby table. What matters is that I'm done pretending. I'm done shrinking myself to fit into your family's mould. I'm done being the grateful little nobody who should be honoured to marry above her station. Jenny, that's not... Miss Morrison! A voice cut through our tension. James Hartford, looking distinguished in his tuxedo, approached with a warm smile. I was hoping to see you here. There are some investors I'd like you to meet. They're very interested in your expansion plans. I turned to him gratefully. I'd be delighted, Mr. Hartford. As I walked away, leaving Daniel standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, I could feel eyes on me from every direction. Eleanor's, burning with rage, Victoria's, calculating and cold, the society matrons, whispering behind their champagne glasses, and Daniel's, confused, angry, and for the first time uncertain. Let them watch. Let them whisper. Let them wonder who this new Jenny Morrison was and what she was capable of. Because they hadn't seen anything yet. The investors James introduced me to were exactly who I'd hoped to meet. The Thornton brothers, tech moguls who would dominate the next decade of innovation. In my previous life, they'd approached me once, but I'd declined their partnership offer on Eleanor's advice. She'd said they were too risky, too new money. That decision had cost me millions and eventually contributed to my company's downfall. This time, I spent an hour discussing artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and market projections that wouldn't make sense for another 2 years. They listened with growing excitement, exchanging glances that told me I'd hooked them. Miss Morrison, the younger Thornton brother said as the conversation wound down, you have a remarkable vision. Most people in your position would play it safe, stick with traditional investments. But you're talking about the future like you've already lived it. If only he knew. I believe in taking calculated risks, I said, and I believe in trusting my instincts, even when everyone else says I'm wrong. We exchanged business cards, agreed to meet next week, and shook hands on what would become a partnership worth hundreds of millions. As they walked away, I felt rather than saw Daniel approaching again. Those are the Thorntons, he said, his voice tight. Mother told you to stay away from them. They're unstable, unproven. Your mother doesn't make my business decisions, Daniel. I thought I'd made that clear. I turned to leave, but he caught my arm again, harder this time. I'm trying to protect you, to help you. Why can't you see that? I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. Around us, people were definitely watching now. The scene was becoming public, messy, exactly what the Carters hated most. Let go of me. My voice was quiet, but something in it made several nearby conversations stop. Not until you explain what's happening. Not until you tell me why you're throwing away everything we've built together. Everything we've built? The words came out as a laugh, bitter and sharp. Daniel, we haven't built anything together. You've built a fantasy where I'm a supporting character in your family's story, where my dreams, my company, my entire life is secondary to maintaining the Carter image. That's not true, isn't it? I pulled my arm free with a sharp twist. Tell me, when was the last time you asked about my work, my goals, what I wanted from life beyond being your acceptable wife? He stared at me, and I could see him mentally scrolling through our recent conversations, looking for evidence to counter my accusation. He wouldn't find any, because even in this timeline, even before the true betrayals, he'd never really seen me as a person with my own ambitions. I love you, he said finally, desperately. Doesn't that count for something? Love without respect is just another form of control. I stepped back, creating distance between us. And I'm done being controlled. I walked away for the second time that night, and this time he didn't follow. The ballroom felt electric with tension, every guest pretending not to watch while hanging on every word. By tomorrow, this scene would be the talk of every society circle in the city. Perfect. Outside, the cool night air felt like absolution. I breathed deeply, steadying myself against the rush of adrenaline and old pain. In my previous life, this gala had ended with me in tears, Eleanor's criticisms ringing in my ears while Victoria comforted Daniel about his difficult fiancé. Tonight, I was the one walking away with my head high and my power intact. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Impressive performance tonight. I look forward to our partnership, Alexander Thornton. I smiled in the darkness. This was just the beginning. The car I'd called arrived, sleek and black and mine, paid for with money I'd earned, not an allowance from the Carter family. As I slid into the back seat, my phone lit up with messages. Daniel, Eleanor, even Victoria, all demanding explanations, offering concerns, trying to pull me back into their narrative. I turned off my phone completely and watched the city lights blur past my window. They thought this was rebellion, a phase, a tantrum that would burn out once I'd made my point. They had no idea this was war, and I'd already won it once before, by losing everything. This time, I would win it properly. I would watch them scramble, scheme, and slowly realise that the weapon they'd always used against me, my love for Daniel, my desire for acceptance, no longer worked. I would build an empire while they built their desperate plans. I would rise while they struggled to understand what had changed. I would smile while they burned. Because that's the thing about rebirth. You don't just get a second chance at life. You get the chance to rewrite every ending. And my ending would no longer be one of forgiveness, reconciliation, or fairy tale love. It would be one of victory, vindication, and watching the people who destroyed me beg for mercy I would never grant. Daniel Carter thought he'd lost a fiancée tonight. He had no idea he'd actually lost the only woman who would have ever truly loved him. And by the time he realised it, it would be far, far too late.